Abraham Lincoln wrote a letter to George McClellan on October 13, 1862. Lincoln was certainly responding to McClellan's less than stellar performance after the Battle of Antietam 1 month before. The battle was hard fought on both sides, but Lee retreated and McClellan failed to pursue him and finish him off. Lincoln was also responding to the fact that this was the way McClellan had continually performed since Lincoln made him General-in-Chief of the Army and then head of the Army of the Potomac. 6 months before, in a letter dated April 9, 1862, Lincoln tried to spur McClellan to action. He said, "I think it is the precise time for you to strike a blow. By delay, the enemy will relatively gain upon you. That is, he will gain faster by fortifications and reinforcements than you can by reinforcements alone. And once more, let me tell you, it is indispensable to you that you strike a blow." In both letters, one can hear Lincoln's frustration with McClellan's failure to act, and hiding behind some of the words, one can hear his anger at a general who was grandiose in his talk about what he was going to accomplish, but who failed to accomplish much of anything beyond training and organizing the army. Most notable, however, in the letter of October 13th, one can also hear evidence of Lincoln's remarkable leadership. He juggled the Army's love of Little Mac, the public's increasing desire for victory, Congress's anger with McClellan over his inaction, and the pressures of waging a war and seeking a victory. This letter is an example of what effective, successful leadership is. Lincoln demonstrates his leadership by correcting and coaching his subordinate, setting realistic goals within an effective strategy, and keeping his focus on the bigger picture without letting personal feelings get in the way. Lincoln began his letter by chastising McClellan and then encouraging him to change his ways. He referred to McClellan's overcautiousness and challenged him to stand up to the enemy. "Are you not overcautious when you assume that you cannot do what the enemy is constantly doing? Should you not claim to be at least his equal in prowess and act upon the claim?" He then questioned McClellan for insisting he needed the railroad from Harper's Ferry to Winchester to be in working order. He points out that the enemy has longer supply lines without the benefit of railroads. He said, "But the enemy does now subsist his army at Winchester at a distance nearly twice as great from railroad transportation as you would have to do without the railroad last named. He now wagons from Culpeper Courthouse, which is just about twice as far as you would have to do from Harper's Ferry." Lincoln pointed out very clearly his dissatisfaction with McClellan's inaction and tried to appeal to his pride to be at least as good as his enemy. "Why can you not reach there before him, unless you admit that he is more than your equal on a march?" Lincoln manifested his solid leadership by not humiliating his subordinate, but rather challenging him to be better than the enemy. Creating realistic but challenging goals within a workable strategy is a hallmark of good leadership. Lincoln did this for McClellan, even though at the beginning of the war he essentially knew nothing of military strategy. He reminded McClellan that one of his basic strategies of war is to operate upon the enemy's communications as much as possible without exposing your own. He encouraged McClellan to put himself in his enemy's shoes and to realize that the enemy would break your communication with Richmond within the next 24 hours. He then said, "You dread his going to Pennsylvania, but if he does so in full force, he gives up his communications to you absolutely. And you have nothing to do but to follow and ruin him. If he does so with less than full force, fall upon and beat what is left behind all the better." Could Lincoln have been obliquely referring to McClellan's recurring overestimation of the size of the enemy's army? Here he gave McClellan reason not to worry about it, because if Lee went in full force, then his communication lines would be damaged, which would help the Union, and if he did not, then McClellan would surely have had the upper hand. For the remainder of the letter, Lincoln continued to give military strategy, but within the strategy, he made several points regarding McClellan's hesitancy to fight, and once again he tried to coach McClellan into fighting. After explaining that if the enemy moved towards Richmond, he should stay close and try to beat him to Richmond, he said, "I say, try. If we never try, we shall never succeed." Lincoln, as leader, was coaching McClellan to at least make an effort to finish the job. One is reminded of a coach trying to encourage his team in the last minutes of the game when they are in danger of losing. He then told McClellan to fight Lee at Winchester if Lee decided not to move towards Richmond. McClellan would have had a distinct advantage because Lee would have been so far from Richmond. He entreated McClellan not to waste the opportunity and not to just push him away, but to finish him off. We should not so operate as to merely drive him away. This surely is a reference to McClellan's not pursuing Lee after Antietam. One can hear Lincoln's desperation at one last-ditch effort to get McClellan to move. Calm, thoughtful decision-making, void of personal feelings, is another hallmark of a good leader. Lincoln was anything but impulsive when it came to dealing with General McClellan. McClellan had given him ample reason to act hastily. He was guilty of snubbing Lincoln and speaking badly of him to others. One famous example was a time when Lincoln went to McClellan's house one evening to meet with him. McClellan left Lincoln waiting and went to bed, never greeting the president. Historian Richard Slotkin wrote that McClellan was utterly contemptuous of Abraham Lincoln's character, intelligence, social origins, and morals. He dismissed the president as the original guerrilla, a well-meaning but weak-minded baboon surrounded by fools and traitors. William C. Davis described in 1861 that Little Mac bristled at being subordinate to the civil authority and especially to Lincoln, of whom he almost instantly developed a condescending and patronizing opinion. He not only regarded the president as his intellectual and social inferior, but also passed on that attitude to those around him, or even fostered it. He often ignored Lincoln's advice and rarely engaged the enemy in battle despite Lincoln's entreaties to do otherwise. Looking at the evidence, most would find it difficult to blame Lincoln for quickly removing McClellan from his position. But as a good leader, Lincoln did not lose sight of the bigger picture of the war. He did not let his pride or ego get in the way. He did not let personal feelings block the path to victory. Michael Burlingame described in his biography of Lincoln a cabinet meeting in which Lincoln told his cabinet that he was going to put McClellan in charge of defending Washington, D.C. Shocked, his cabinet urged him not to. Lincoln responded that he would gladly resign his place, but he could not see who could do the work wanted as well as McClellan. Lincoln understood that he had no one else and knew he must not act rashly. His tone in the letter was very respectful and forceful. In the 5th paragraph, he stated, "You know I desired but did not order you to cross the Potomac below instead of above the Shenandoah and Blue Ridge." And he ended the letter, "This letter is in no sense an order." It seems that Lincoln was trying to give McClellan the freedom to choose to do what he, Lincoln, wanted. Perhaps his effort here was to balance McClellan's ego with his need as commander-in-chief. He stated the clear, unambiguous expectations that he had for McClellan, and yet stroked his ego in order to get the desired result. 3 weeks later, Lincoln reached the end of his rope and fired McClellan. This letter was an 11th-hour attempt to get his subordinate to understand what he was supposed to do. Unfortunately, McClellan was not willing to follow Lincoln's lead. The letter not only demonstrates Lincoln's impressive leadership, but it highlights the lack of it on McClellan's part. His lack of ability to engage the enemy made things very difficult for Lincoln and wasted a lot of time in finishing the war. In the end, it not only cost him his position in the army, but quite possibly was a major factor that led to his defeat in the 1864 presidential election to President Lincoln.